The enemy was already inside. What if I told you the biggest threat to America's military wasn't hiding overseas, but standing watch right here at home? Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Picture a quiet U.S. Navy base in San Diego. Morning light over the Pacific. Flags snapping in the wind. Sailors moving like clockwork. An amphibious assault ship docked calmly. Just another day, same routine. Nothing looks wrong. Nothing feels off. And that's exactly the problem. Because while everyone else was focused on enemies thousands of miles away, one of them was already inside the wire. Not sneaking in. Not hacking from afar. He had a badge, a uniform, and full access.
Yeah, you heard that right.
This isn't some over-the-top spy movie with explosions and disguises. This is way scarier. This is the kind of betrayal that happens quietly, one message, one file, one payment at a time. The kind that doesn't make noise until the damage is already done. A young U.S. Navy sailor, 25 years old, someone sworn to protect this country, was caught selling American military secrets to China. Secrets about U.S. warships, about how they work, and more importantly, how they can be broken. That's not just paperwork. That's real-world danger. We're talking about information that could decide whether a ship survives a conflict or becomes a floating target. Details that, in the wrong hands, could put American sailors, Marines, and entire crews at risk. The kind of intel that turns a routine deployment into a deadly ambush. And here's the part that makes people angry. He didn't do it for millions. He didn't do it for some lavish lifestyle. According to federal prosecutors, he sold out for just $12,000.
Yeah.
That's it. No mansion. No Ferrari. No big payday. Just enough cash to make you ask, seriously? This is what America's secrets were worth to you. That realization hits hard because it tells you this wasn't some mastermind criminal. This was something far more unsettling. And now comes the part that should make every American pause. This whole thing didn't start in a dark alley or a secret meeting. It started online, on social media. A random message, a friendly conversation, someone posing as a harmless naval enthusiast. No trench coat, no accent, just DMs. That's the chilling part. Because investigators say this so-called enthusiast was actually a Chinese intelligence officer, and he didn't need force, threats, or blackmail. All he needed was patience, a little praise, a little money, and access. The sailor wasn't naive either. In fact, he reportedly admitted to a friend that what he was being asked to do was obviously espionage, dropping an expletive. Just to be clear, he understood the stakes. So this wasn't confusion. This was a choice. And once that door opened, it didn't stop. Files were sent, manuals shared, information passed along piece by piece, how ships operate, how they're maintained, how the Navy really works behind the scenes. Prosecutors say it wasn't just one ship either. The damage, they argue, could affect an entire class of U.S. warships. Fast forward to a federal courtroom. Evidence stacks up. A jury listens closely. And the verdict lands hard. Guilty on 6 serious charges, including violations of the Espionage Act. This week, the sentence came down nearly 17 years in prison. But here's the uneasy truth, and this is where things get real uncomfortable. If it happened once, if it started with a DM, if it cost only $12,000, then the question isn't what happened. The question is, how many more times could this happen, and who's already being watched right now? The damage no one saw coming. By the time federal investigators finally connected the dots, this wasn't a potential threat anymore.
It was already baked in.
The damage was done, and there was no rewind button. Prosecutors didn't sugarcoat it. They said this wasn't about one careless sailor or one compromised ship. According to them, an entire class of U.S. Navy amphibious assault ships was exposed. Not one vessel, not one mission, an entire class. That's the moment when this story levels up. Amphibious assault ships aren't just big boats with guns. They're floating cities built for war. They carry Marines, aircraft, vehicles, everything needed to launch operations anywhere on the planet. This is how the U.S. projects power. This is how America shows up. So when prosecutors say sensitive information about these ships was handed over, they're not talking about trivia. They're talking about insight that could tilt the balance in a real conflict. Now here's where a lot of viewers might think, okay, but weren't these just boring manuals? That's exactly what the defense argued. They claimed much of the information could be found online, that their client wasn't some mastermind, just a guy doing low-level work, sanding, painting, clocking in and out. Sounds harmless until you hear the next part. Because prosecutors fired back with one brutal idea: context. A single document doesn't mean much, but thousands of pages, combined with insider access, daily routines, and first-hand knowledge, that turns into something else entirely. That turns into a playbook. A playbook that answers questions no enemy should ever have answers to. What systems fail first under stress? What breaks when maintenance gets rushed? Where do crews adapt when procedures fall short? That's not paperwork. That's leverage. And then the danger escalates again because it stops being about machines. In one exchange cited in the indictment, the sailor agreed to provide information about the number and training level of U.S. Marines during an upcoming international maritime warfare exercise. That's the moment it gets personal. That's not steel and wiring. That's people. That's young men and women whose safety depends on secrecy. Here's the part that should really mess with your head. This wasn't a dramatic, one-time betrayal. It was slow, casual, almost routine. Investigators say it started in early 2022 with small offers, $500 for simple updates. Which ships were docked? Who was around? Nothing flashy. Almost like a side hustle. That's how lines get crossed. Once it feels normal, the next request doesn't feel so crazy. And before long, prosecutors say, at least 30 technical ship manuals were handed over for around $5,000. That's when this stopped being reckless and started being catastrophic. When the Navy finally moved, the fall was brutal. He was dishonorably discharged, not just fired, but stripped of honor, benefits, and legacy. In military terms, that's a scar you never lose. It's public. It's permanent. It says, you don't belong here anymore. At sentencing, prosecutors pushed for nearly 22 years in prison, arguing the betrayal cut that deep. The judge settled on nearly 17, still a lifetime for a 25-year-old. But here's the part that should leave you uneasy. This wasn't a cyber attack from overseas. This wasn't a spy sneaking through a fence. This was someone already inside, trusted, credentialed, invisible. And if it can happen this quietly, if it can start with a DM and a few $100, then the real nightmare isn't what we caught. It's what we haven't. How espionage really works now. By now, you're probably asking yourself, how does something like this even happen? How does a high-tech military, layered with checks and security, get blindsided by one person with a phone? Here's the brutal truth. Modern espionage doesn't start with secrets. It starts with people. Yeah, real humans, not gadgets, not hacks, not Hollywood-style spy stunts. People. And that's the part that hits differently. Investigators say the sailor wasn't recruited in a shadowy warehouse or some cliché secret meeting. Nope. This all started online. Social media. A DM. A casual chat that felt harmless. Until it wasn't. That's the scary bit. This kind of recruitment doesn't scream spy thriller. It feels like mentorship. It feels like respect. Like someone finally sees you. The alleged recruiter? A Chinese intelligence officer posing as a naval enthusiast. No trench coat. No accent. No sudden pressure. Just interest. Praise. Validation. A little money tossed in, like a side hustle. For someone isolated, eager to prove themselves, and hungry for approval, that combination is dangerous. It's subtle, insidious, and completely believable. The sailor in this case wasn't some villain craving wealth or power. His own lawyers argued he acted from a need for approval, not anger at the U.S. or greed. He had grown up isolated, raised by family who struggled mentally, leaving him craving guidance. That doesn't excuse the betrayal, but it shows how the door opens. Espionage today is psychological. It's patient. It targets the weak spots in humans, not just systems. Intelligence officers don't hunt for villains. They hunt for the overlooked, the underappreciated, the disconnected. Here's where it gets unsettling. First come the small asks, then the little favors. A few $100 here, a ship update there. Nothing feels like crossing a line, until suddenly you've already crossed it. Even more chilling, the sailor reportedly knew what he was doing. He told a friend that what he was asked to do was quite obviously espionage, adding a profanity for emphasis. That line hits like a punch to the gut because it confirms intent. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't ignorance. This was rationalization in action. A DM doesn't feel like espionage. A few $100 doesn't feel like treason. A mentor-like message doesn't feel like betrayal. Until it does. And by the time it does, the consequences are already locked in. This wasn't a one-off. It wasn't some random blunder. It was slow, patient, methodical. Emotional manipulation disguised as guidance. Validation disguised as interest. Isolation disguised as attention. Which brings us to the part that should really make you uneasy. If agencies know how to find vulnerable people, if they know how to blend in, earn trust, and stay invisible, then how many others are being watched right now? Not suspects. Not criminals. Just everyday people. Americans scrolling through social media. People with secrets they don't even know are valuable. That's the nightmare scenario. And here's the kicker. Unlike a cyber attack, this type of espionage leaves almost no trace until it's too late. No alarms. No warning lights. Just someone you trust letting the wrong people in. This isn't a theory. This isn't fiction. It's real. It's human. And it could happen again. The aftermath and why it should terrify you. By now, you should feel it. This story isn't just about one sailor. It's about how fragile our systems can really be. One person's choice sent ripples that could have crippled a fleet. And the fallout? It's still echoing. Here's where the stakes hit nuclear. Federal prosecutors didn't just say the sailor betrayed one ship. They said he exposed an entire class of U.S. Navy amphibious assault ships, floating cities of war-carrying Marines, helicopters, and equipment anywhere in the world. This is how America projects power, how we respond to crises globally. And in the wrong hands, these ships, these crews, these missions could have been sitting ducks. And the cost of this betrayal? $12,000. That's right. All that risk, all that damage sold cheap. That's the part that makes you furious and unsettled. All it took was a few side hustle payments, and an entire fleet's secrets were compromised. The sailor paid a price. Harsh, public, permanent. Dishonorable discharge. Stripped of rank, benefits, and honor. And now, nearly 17 years in prison. A lifetime sentence for someone barely old enough to vote when it started. That's the human cost. The punishment is real. But the ripple? The ripple is what keeps this story alive and terrifying. Here's the kicker, and this is where it gets truly creepy. The enemy doesn't always sneak in from outside. The enemy already lives inside the house. Sitting at the base, wearing the uniform, swiping their ID, walking among colleagues who trust them, waiting for a moment, then quietly slipping through the cracks. And it could happen again. Modern espionage doesn't need hacks, gadgets, or dramatic break-ins. It works quietly, emotionally, person to person, online, behind screens we all trust. Validation. Loneliness.
Mentorship.
Little favors. A DM that doesn't feel like betrayal until the damage is done. That's the playbook. And the scariest part? It works. Every time it's used right.
Think about it.
Someone overlooked. Someone isolated. Someone eager to please. A few small requests. A little money. And suddenly lives, missions, and national security hang in the balance. This isn't just theory. It's real. It happened. And the conditions that made it possible? They still exist. The doors aren't locked. The threat is invisible. And the next breach could already be underway, quietly, patiently, perfectly. So, the lesson here is simple, terrifying, and unforgettable. America's security doesn't just depend on ships, weapons, or codes. It depends on humans, and humans can be manipulated. Loyalty can be twisted. Trust can be weaponized. And sometimes the enemy isn't outside, they're already inside your house, your workplace, your fleet, maybe even your own unit. And that is the part that should make every American sit up, take a deep breath, and shiver.